Walk into almost any city in the world and ask someone to name a luxury watch brand. The answer will almost always be the same: Rolex. It doesn't matter whether you're in New York, Dubai, London, Tokyo, or Singapore. Even people who know almost nothing about watches recognize the name. The five-pointed crown has become one of the most powerful symbols of wealth, success, and achievement ever created. Athletes celebrate championships wearing Rolex watches. Business executives wear them in boardrooms. Hollywood actors wear them on red carpets. World leaders, entrepreneurs, explorers, and collectors have all embraced the brand for more than a century. But here's the remarkable part. Rolex wasn't the first Swiss watch company. It wasn't the oldest. It didn't invent the wristwatch. And it has never produced the most complicated timepieces in the world. In fact, if you compare Rolex purely on traditional watchmaking craftsmanship, there are brands capable of building movements that are far more intricate and technically impressive. Companies like Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, Audemars Piguet, and A. Lange & Söhne regularly produce watches that require significantly more manual craftsmanship and engineering, yet none of them have achieved what Rolex has. Today, Rolex is comfortably the most valuable watch brand on Earth. Industry analysts estimate that the company generates well over $10 billion in annual revenue, selling roughly 1 million watches each year while producing only a fraction of the global luxury watch market. More astonishingly, many of its most popular models cannot simply be purchased by walking into a boutique. Customers often spend years on waiting lists, while the resale value of certain Rolex watches exceeds their original retail price by tens of thousands of dollars. In most industries, companies compete by making more products and selling to as many customers as possible. Rolex chose the opposite strategy. It deliberately limited supply, protected its reputation with extraordinary discipline, and transformed a simple mechanical watch into one of the world's most desirable luxury products. The company rarely grants interviews. It reveals very little about its finances. Its marketing is carefully controlled. Its manufacturing process remains highly secretive. Even though millions of people wear Rolex watches, the company itself remains one of the most private businesses in the luxury industry. That mystery has only strengthened its appeal. But Rolex's success wasn't built by accident. It was the result of more than a century of relentless innovation, brilliant branding, uncompromising quality, and an almost obsessive understanding of human psychology. While competitors focused on making watches, Rolex focused on building desire. It understood that people were never simply buying a way to tell time. They were buying a symbol of achievement, reliability, and permanence. The story of Rolex is therefore much bigger than watches. It is the story of how one company transformed a practical tool into a global status symbol, built one of the strongest luxury brands in history, and convinced millions of people that owning a Rolex wasn't just a purchase, it was a milestone. To understand how Rolex became the world's most valuable watch brand, we have to go back to the beginning, when a young entrepreneur with almost no manufacturing experience arrived in London carrying an idea that would eventually reshape the entire watch industry. Chapter 1. A watchmaker. With no workshop. The story of Rolex begins with an unusual contradiction. The company that would eventually become the world's most famous Swiss watchmaker wasn't founded in Switzerland at all. It began in London. In 1905, a 24-year-old entrepreneur named Hans Wilsdorf established a company with his brother-in-law, Alfred Davis. At the time, the business wasn't manufacturing watches. Instead, it imported high-quality movements from Switzerland, placed them into carefully selected watch cases, and sold the finished products in Britain. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand the watch industry at the beginning of the 20th century. Pocket watches dominated the market. Wristwatches existed, but they were widely dismissed as jewelry rather than serious timekeeping instruments. Most men considered them too small, too fragile, and far too inaccurate for everyday use. If you were a businessman, a military officer, or a railway conductor, someone whose profession depended on precise timekeeping, you carried a pocket watch. Almost everyone believed the wristwatch was a passing trend. Hans Wilsdorf disagreed. He believed the future belonged on the wrist. It was a bold prediction because at the time, the technology simply wasn't there. Miniaturizing a mechanical movement without sacrificing accuracy was one of the greatest engineering challenges in watchmaking. Smaller movements were generally less reliable. more sensitive to shocks, and harder to regulate. Convincing customers to trust a wristwatch meant solving a problem that much of the industry considered impossible. Rather than trying to build everything himself, Wilsdorf focused on finding the best specialists. Swiss manufacturers already had an unmatched reputation for producing precision watch movements, so he partnered with Egler, a movement maker in Biel, Switzerland. These movements were then assembled into high-quality cases before being sold through his company in London. From the beginning, Wilsdorf wasn't interested in making ordinary watches. He wanted to make the most accurate wristwatch in the world. Accuracy became his obsession. In an era when most companies advertised ornate engraving or luxurious materials, Wilsdorf emphasized precision. He believed customers would eventually choose reliability over decoration, and every decision he made reflected that philosophy. In 1908, he registered a name that would eventually become one of the most valuable brands on earth: Rolex. The origin of the name remains surrounded by mystery. Wilsdorf later claimed he wanted a word that could be pronounced easily in every language, looked balanced on a watch dial, and was short enough to fit elegantly above the hands. Whether that explanation tells the whole story remains unknown, but the result was marketing genius. Rolex sounded distinctive, memorable, and unlike anything else in the industry. 2 years later, the company achieved an important milestone. A Rolex wristwatch received a Swiss certificate of chronometric precision, one of the highest standards of accuracy available at the time. Soon afterward, a Rolex earned the prestigious Class A chronometer certificate from the Kew Observatory in England, a level of precision usually reserved for marine chronometers used in navigation. This was a turning point. For the first time, people began taking wristwatches seriously as precision instruments rather than fashionable accessories. But just as the company was gaining momentum, Europe was thrown into turmoil. The First World War changed almost every aspect of society, including the way people told time. Soldiers quickly discovered that pocket watches were impractical in combat. Retrieving one from a pocket while carrying equipment or operating weapons was slow and inconvenient. Wristwatches allowed troops to coordinate attacks, synchronize movements, and keep both hands free. What had once been considered a novelty suddenly became a necessity. When the war ended, millions of returning soldiers had grown accustomed to wearing watches on their wrists. Civilian fashion followed, and demand for wristwatches exploded across Europe. Hans Wilsdorf had predicted this shift years before it happened. Yet another challenge remained. Early wristwatches were still vulnerable to dust, moisture, and everyday wear. A single drop of water entering the case could damage the delicate mechanical movement inside. Even routine daily use often reduced accuracy over time. If wristwatches were going to replace pocket watches permanently, they needed to become far more durable. Once again, Rolex decided not to follow the industry. It chose to redefine it. Rather than competing through decoration or prestige alone, Hans Wilsdorf set out to build something almost unheard of at the time: a wristwatch that ordinary people could trust in extraordinary conditions. That ambition would lead to one of the most important inventions in the history of watchmaking, transforming Rolex from a promising young company into a global pioneer and laying the foundation for the luxury empire that exists today. Chapter 2. The Watch That Changed Everything. By the early 1920s, Rolex had proven that wristwatches could be accurate. Now Hans Wilsdorf faced an even bigger challenge. Accuracy meant very little if the watch stopped working after a rainy afternoon. At the time, mechanical watches were incredibly delicate. Tiny particles of dust could enter the movement through the crown. Moisture could corrode internal components. Even something as simple as washing your hands carried the risk of damaging an expensive watch. Most owners treated their watches carefully because they had no other choice. Wilsdorf believed that if wristwatches were truly going to replace pocket watches, they had to survive everyday life, not just special occasions. Everyday life. In 1926, Rolex introduced what would become one of the most important innovations in modern watchmaking: the Oyster. It was the world's first commercially successful waterproof and dustproof wristwatch. The breakthrough wasn't a single invention, but a completely new approach to watch design. Rolex engineers developed a case with a screw-down bezel, screw-down case back, and screw-down winding crown. Together, these components created a sealed shell that protected the movement from water, dust, and dirt far better than anything available at the time. Today, waterproof watches are taken for granted. In 1926, they were revolutionary. But Hans Wilsdorf understood something that many inventors overlook. Building a great product isn't enough. People have to believe it works. So instead of simply claiming the Oyster was waterproof, Rolex staged one of the greatest marketing campaigns in luxury history. In 1927, a young British swimmer named Mercedes Gleitze attempted to swim across the English Channel. Before she entered the freezing water, Wilsdorf strapped a Rolex Oyster around her neck. More than 10 hours later, after enduring cold temperatures, strong currents, and rough seas, the watch was still running perfectly. The story made headlines across Europe. Rolex immediately purchased full-page advertisements celebrating the achievement, displaying the watch alongside newspaper coverage of the swim. More importantly, Wilsdorf placed Oyster watches inside aquariums in jewelry store windows, allowing customers to see them submerged underwater while continuing to keep perfect time. It was brilliant marketing. Instead of asking customers to trust advertisements, Rolex showed them proof. That philosophy would define the company for decades. Rather than hiring actors or relying on exaggerated slogans, Rolex consistently demonstrated its products in the real world. Whether climbing mountains, exploring oceans, or crossing continents, the watch was always presented as a tool capable of performing under the toughest conditions imaginable. Innovation continued just a few years later. Although the Oyster solved the problem of water resistance, another issue remained. Mechanical watches had to be wound by hand almost every day. Forget to wind them, and they stopped. Rolex wanted to eliminate that inconvenience. In 1931, the company introduced the Perpetual rotor, the world's first commercially successful self-winding mechanism using a free-spinning rotor. As the wearer moved their wrist throughout the day, the rotor automatically wound the mainspring, keeping the watch running without daily manual winding. It seems like a simple feature today. Back then, it fundamentally changed the ownership experience. For the first time, a luxury wristwatch became not only accurate and durable, but also remarkably convenient. The combination of the Oyster case and the Perpetual movement created a formula that still defines Rolex nearly a century later. In fact, many modern Rolex watches continue to carry the words Oyster Perpetual on the dial, not as marketing language, but as a reminder of the two inventions that transformed the company. What made Rolex different wasn't simply its engineering, it was the company's philosophy. While many competitors focused on creating more complicated watches with additional functions, Rolex concentrated on perfecting the fundamentals. Every improvement made the watch more reliable, more durable, and easier to live with. That obsession with refinement became the company's greatest competitive advantage. By the 1930s, Rolex had established a reputation unlike any other watchmaker. Customers no longer saw the brand as a manufacturer of luxury accessories. They saw it as a manufacturer of dependable instruments. That reputation would soon be tested in the harshest environments on Earth. Because if a Rolex could survive the world's highest mountains, the deepest oceans, and the fastest racetracks, then it could survive almost anything. And Hans Wilsdorf knew those achievements wouldn't just prove the quality of his watches. They would transform Rolex into a legend. Chapter 3. How Rolex sold a dream. Instead of a watch, by the middle of the 20th century, Rolex had achieved something most watchmakers only dreamed of. It had created one of the world's most reliable wristwatches, introduced groundbreaking innovations like the Oyster case and the Perpetual movement, and earned a reputation for exceptional quality. But Hans Wilsdorf understood something even more important. Building the best product doesn't automatically make you the biggest brand. People don't buy luxury products based solely on specifications. They buy stories. Rolex became the first watch company to master that idea on a global scale. Instead of advertising technical details, it began connecting its watches with extraordinary human achievement. The message was simple. If remarkable people trusted Rolex during history's greatest challenges, then ordinary customers could trust it in everyday life. It was one of the most successful marketing strategies ever created. In 1953, New Zealand mountaineer Sir Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay became the first climbers to successfully reach the summit of Mount Everest. While historians continue debating exactly which watches were worn during the final ascent, Rolex had supplied expedition members with Oyster watches for testing. Rather than claiming credit for the achievement itself, Rolex focused on a broader message. Its watches had performed in one of the harshest environments on Earth, reinforcing the brand's reputation for durability and precision. The same philosophy extended beneath the ocean. In 1960, the bathyscaphe Trieste descended nearly 11,000 meters into the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point on Earth. Attached to the outside of the vessel was an experimental Rolex called the Deep Sea Special. Against unimaginable water pressure, the watch survived the journey and continued functioning perfectly after returning to the surface. It was more than a scientific achievement. It was another demonstration that Rolex watches could survive environments far beyond anything their customers would ever experience. Rolex repeated this strategy across every field imaginable: motor racing, tennis, golf, sailing, aviation, exploration. Instead of paying celebrities simply to appear in advertisements, the company partnered with people who represented excellence in their professions. Over time, these relationships evolved into what Rolex calls its testimonies, individuals whose accomplishments reflected the same values the brand wanted associated with its watches. Names like Roger Federer, Tiger Woods, Arnold Palmer, Martin Scorsese, James Cameron, and countless others became connected with Rolex not because they were famous, but because they represented mastery, longevity, and achievement. Rolex wasn't selling watches. It was selling aspiration. That distinction changed everything. Around the same time, the company introduced models designed for specific professions and lifestyles. In 1953 came the Submariner, built for professional divers. A year later came the GMT Master, developed for Pan American Airways pilots who needed to track multiple time zones during international flights. The Explorer celebrated the spirit of mountaineering, while the day-date became known as the President, after being worn by influential political leaders and business executives. Each model solved a practical problem, but each also created an identity. Owning a Submariner suggested adventure. Owning a GMT Master represented international travel. Owning a day-date symbolized success and influence. Customers weren't simply choosing different watches. They were choosing different versions of themselves. Rolex also displayed remarkable discipline in something most companies struggled to resist: overexpansion. As luxury demand increased, competitors rushed to introduce dozens of new collections every year. Rolex refused to follow. Its catalog remained surprisingly small. The Submariner still looked like a Submariner. The Datejust still resembled the watch introduced decades earlier. The Daytona evolved carefully rather than dramatically. This consistency created something incredibly rare in luxury goods: timelessness. A Rolex purchased 20 years ago rarely feels outdated today. Instead of chasing trends, the company focused on gradual refinement, ensuring every new generation improved the previous one without abandoning its identity. Perhaps the greatest marketing achievement of all was making scarcity part of the brand itself. Unlike many luxury companies that maximize production whenever demand increases, Rolex chose restraint. Authorized dealers rarely had their most desirable models available immediately. Waiting lists became common, and demand consistently exceeded supply. Ironically, the harder a Rolex became to buy, the more people wanted one. Scarcity created desirability. Desirability strengthened prestige. Prestige reinforced demand. It became a cycle that competitors have spent decades trying, and largely failing, to replicate. By the end of the 20th century, Rolex had accomplished something extraordinary. It was no longer competing with other watchmakers alone. It had become one of the most recognizable luxury brands in the world, standing alongside companies like Ferrari, Louis Vuitton, and Hermès. And yet, the company's greatest strength wasn't its marketing. It was the fact that every promise made by the brand was supported by a product capable of living up to it. That combination of exceptional engineering and masterful storytelling transformed Rolex from a watch manufacturer into a global symbol of success, one that millions aspired to own, even if they never considered themselves watch enthusiasts. Chapter 4. The Business Behind the Crown. By the 1980s, Rolex was no longer simply a successful watch company. It had become one of the most recognizable luxury brands in the world. Yet behind the famous crown logo was a business unlike almost any other. Most luxury companies answer to shareholders. Public investors expect quarterly growth, rising profits, and constant expansion. That pressure often forces businesses to increase production, chase trends, or sacrifice exclusivity in pursuit of higher sales. Rolex operates differently. The company isn't publicly traded, and remarkably, it isn't owned by a billionaire family either. Instead, Rolex is owned by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, a private charitable foundation established after Hans Wilsdorf's death in 1960. Because Wilsdorf and his wife never had children, he arranged for ownership of the company to pass to the foundation, ensuring that Rolex would remain independent rather than being divided among heirs or sold to outside investors. That single decision changed the future of the company. Without shareholders demanding short-term profits, Rolex gained something incredibly rare in modern business: the freedom to think decades ahead instead of quarter by quarter. Rather than asking how many watches it could sell this year, Rolex focused on how it could protect its reputation for the next 100 years. That philosophy influences almost every decision the company makes. Take manufacturing. Rolex produces roughly 1 million watches every year, an impressive number by luxury standards. But compared to global demand, it isn't nearly enough. The company could almost certainly sell significantly more watches if it expanded production aggressively. It chooses not to. Rolex understands a simple principle that many luxury brands forget. Exclusivity disappears the moment everyone can own the product. Instead of flooding the market, Rolex carefully controls production while continuously investing in quality. Every movement, every bracelet, every clasp, and every dial must meet exceptionally strict standards before leaving the factory. The company even manufactures many of the materials itself. Rolex operates its own foundry, where it produces proprietary 18-karat gold alloys, giving engineers complete control over color, durability, and consistency. Stainless steel models use Oyster steel, a highly corrosion-resistant alloy normally reserved for aerospace and chemical industries. Even components customers never see receive extraordinary attention. This obsession with vertical integration is unusual. Many watch companies purchase parts from outside suppliers. Rolex prefers to make as much as possible itself. That approach requires enormous investment, but it also allows the company to maintain consistent quality across every stage of production. The same philosophy extends to research and testing. Before a new Rolex reaches customers, it undergoes extensive durability tests designed to simulate years of daily use. Watches are exposed to shocks, pressure, temperature changes, magnetic fields, and water resistance tests that often exceed official industry requirements. The goal isn't simply to meet standards, it's to exceed them consistently. Rolex also invests heavily in automation, not to replace craftsmanship, but to improve precision. Advanced robotics perform tasks requiring microscopic accuracy, while experienced watchmakers complete delicate assembly, regulation, and final inspection by hand. The result is a manufacturing process that combines modern engineering with traditional Swiss craftsmanship. But perhaps the company's greatest business decision has nothing to do with manufacturing. It is pricing. Unlike many luxury brands that release dramatic price increases every few years, Rolex has historically adjusted prices gradually while allowing demand to grow naturally. As waiting lists became longer, something unusual happened. Many Rolex watches began increasing in value after purchase. Normally, luxury goods lose value the moment they're sold. Rolex often does the opposite, Models like the Daytona, GMT Master 2, and Submariner have, at various points, sold on the secondary market for thousands, or even tens of thousands, of dollars above their official retail prices. That completely changed how customers viewed the brand. A Rolex was no longer just a luxury purchase, it became an asset. Some buyers still purchased watches purely because they loved them. Others viewed them as stores of value similar to fine art or collectible automobiles. While Rolex has never officially encouraged speculation, the company's disciplined production strategy helped create one of the strongest resale markets in the luxury industry. This has further strengthened the brand's reputation. Customers know they are buying something that not only holds its value remarkably well, but often becomes more desirable over time. Very few luxury products can make that claim. By combining independence, disciplined production, uncompromising quality, and extraordinary brand management, Rolex built something far more valuable than a successful watch company. It built trust. Customers trust that every Rolex will meet the same exacting standards. Collectors trust that iconic models won't suddenly become obsolete. And the market trusts that the company will never sacrifice long-term prestige for short-term profit. That trust has become Rolex's greatest competitive advantage. Because in the luxury industry, products can be copied, marketing campaigns can be imitated, even technology can eventually be matched. But a reputation built over more than a century is almost impossible to replicate. And that reputation is precisely what transformed Rolex from a watchmaker into the world's most valuable watch brand. More than a century ago, Hans Wilsdorf wasn't trying to build the world's most expensive watch. He was trying to build the world's most trusted one. That single idea became the foundation of everything Rolex would accomplish over the next 100 years. While competitors chased complexity, changing trends, or rapid expansion, Rolex remained remarkably disciplined. It focused on precision when others valued decoration. It prioritized durability when most watches were still fragile. It invested in consistency instead of constant reinvention. Over time, those decisions transformed a small London-based company into the most recognizable name in luxury watchmaking. What's remarkable is that Rolex achieved this without relying on marketing alone. Every major breakthrough, the Oyster case, the Perpetual movement, the Submariner, the GMT Master, the Daytona, was designed to solve a real problem before becoming a cultural icon. The company earned its reputation through decades of innovation, then protected that reputation through uncompromising quality and extraordinary patience. Rather than flooding the market with more watches, Rolex carefully controlled its growth, understanding that true luxury is built on desirability, not availability. Today, a Rolex is far more than a mechanical device that tells time. It has become a universal symbol of achievement. For some, it marks years of hard work finally paying off. For others, it's a family heirloom passed from one generation to the next. It represents milestones, memories, and personal success in a way that very few products ever manage to achieve. Even in an age where every smartphone tells time more accurately than a mechanical watch, millions of people still dream of owning a Rolex, not because they need one, but because of what it represents. Perhaps that is the company's greatest achievement. Rolex never convinced the world that it made the best watch for everyone. It convinced the world that owning a Rolex meant joining a legacy built on excellence, reliability, and timeless design. That emotional connection is something competitors can admire, but they cannot simply manufacture. The future will undoubtedly bring new technologies, new luxury brands, and changing consumer habits. Smartwatches will continue to evolve. Younger generations will define luxury in new ways, and the watch industry itself will keep adapting. But history suggests that Rolex has never succeeded by chasing the future. Instead, it has succeeded by remaining true to principles that rarely go out of style: quality over quantity, patience over speed, and long-term reputation over short-term profit. For more than a century, those principles have made Rolex the watch against which every other luxury brand is measured. And that is why, even in a world where time has become digital, the world's most valuable watch brand is still powered by nothing more than gears, springs, craftsmanship, and a crown that has come to symbolize success itself.